As a nurse and mother of three exceptional children, Bina Bendale has seen firsthand how the healthcare system often falls short in caring for individuals with special needs. From witnessing inadequate care for patients in the hospital to fiercely advocating for her own children. In this episode, we're going to explore her journey of advocacy, resilience, and determination to make a difference. Thanks so much for being here with me, Bina, and sharing your story.
Thank you for having me. It's such a blessing. It's always a pleasure to tell my story.
I'd love if you would start out and talk a little bit about your experience. One, you're a nurse. I'm a nurse. We are definitely in the space of advocating for patients. When you're the mother and a nurse, tell us about that and how, you've come up against some things where you've had to really advocate for what your kids needed, and how you're here to support that now for others who don't really have the knowledge, or really it's hard to stand up, right? To have the voice.
Yeah, it really is. And it's really hard to be a mom and a nurse at the same time. Because it's like you know things in your head that you probably should not know, or they assume you know things in your head because you're a nurse. And so it can go either way. Thank you for letting me share my story. My name is Bina Bendale. I'm a mother of three beautiful children, and they all have some sort of special needs. Two of them being autistic and two of them having ADHD. And when my eldest was born, Rohan, he is the one that's severely autistic. I remember early on, I think he was 5 weeks old. He had a cold or a flu. And that's when they're just he has some sort of congenital disorder. And at first I was like, what are you talking about? They never detected anything. We never had any issues during labor or any of that. And I was really blessed that this one particular ER physician was like, no, I think something else is going on. Found out that he had severe laryngeal malacia, which is basically your vocal cords when they're tied together so they don't open and close properly. Well, I didn't know that was a thing when even as a nurse. I was like, what are you doing? Oh, And so as I went through just even that journey alone, I remember the first ENT's like, oh, he'll be fine. He'll grow out of it. And I kind of believed them. Well, that wasn't the case. He was colic. He didn't eat. He choked. He turned blue multiple times. I mean, it was horrible, horrible. I remember there was a 4th of July where he just didn't wake up. He just didn't wake up. And I remember, luckily I was still on maternity leave, and I called up my charge nurse and I was like, I'm bringing him in. He's just not waking up. And they're like, what do you mean he's not waking up? I was like, well, if I would have known, I would not be here. And I remember the physician, when they met me initially, they were like, Bina, he's just sleeping. And I'm like, no, something's wrong. Something's wrong. So after a slew of tests, and they even put a psych consult in for me. I'm serious.
Wow.
They were like, are you sure? Maybe you're postpartum. And they all knew I had postpartum, to find out that they did report. Finally, the ICU doctor came down and was just like, this is exactly how Sid's cases occur. They just don't wake up. Rohan threw up, and they usually aspirate, and then they pass away. And I said, so I'm not crazy. And he goes, no, you are not crazy. He goes, you actually just saved your son's life. Because you were
I just got chills on that.
Yeah.
And how important it is as your motherly instincts to, whether you're a nurse or not, trusting something's not right.
Instinct.
Yeah.
Nothing related to nursing. And I'm asking my mom, my sister, my husband, it's 4th of July. People are over. And I'm just like, y'all, he's not waking up. And they're like, what do you mean he's not waking up? I'm like, I don't know. He's in the swing. It's been 2 hours. He needs to eat, but he's not waking up. No one can wake him up. And then one point,
you go in to people that you work with, so they know you, but because they know of postpartum, It's like the lens that people look through things. And I think that's such an important thing to acknowledge here, that sometimes our perceptions can get in the way, or the things that we think and how we're evaluating it, which leads to dismissing things or not getting the right test. And thankfully, you were able to sit in that very uncomfortable position as a mother where you're feeling like your vulnerability of like, they know of my postpartum depression. It's like now being turned against me. That feels really awful.
Let me take you back when he was born, because that's kind of when it started, actually. So this was my second encounter with near death with my eldest son. The first one was very similar, kept telling them something's wrong, something's wrong. They were like, oh, you're a nurse. You just know too much. This is your anxiety. And I'm like, no, something's wrong with my child. And they back and forth. Finally, the nurse, they even called some of my coworkers from downstairs, like to see, they're like, oh, maybe you can talk to her, you know? And so my coworkers downstairs were like, okay, like this is random. So they did. They came up, they started talking to me. They go, maybe you can explain to her that her son's fine. And some of my coworkers that came upstairs to see me, they were like, I'm not going to be the one to tell this mom that her child is fine. You know, they're like,
Right.
we're here to support her and listen to her, but we're like, we're not going to do it. So they also kind of saw him being a little different, comes in. And so they finally convinced one of the postpartum natal nurses to do a finger stick on my son. They weren't listening to me. So they were like, just do a finger stick, because they were sending me home. Like the physician came in, they were ready to send us home. They're ready to give us discharge instructions, give us clean bill of health. This doctor's like, you're fine, you're a nurse, it's fine. All in your head. Guess what his finger stick was? 15. Which for other people who are not,
Yeah, I was going to say,
know that,
explain.
less than 50 for newborns is crucial. Less than 30 is ICU. Less than 15 literally means death. And they rushed back in. And I remember this doctor, and now I'm screaming, I'm pissed, I'm postpartum, I'm mad, I'm raged. You know, I have my child in my hand, and they're like rushing him and they're taking him out. And that doctor, I remember this doctor's like, he was fine 20 minutes ago. I was like, no, he wasn't. And then, like, I even told her, I was like, you can't touch my child. We're like, I'm the only physician here. So I pushed the code blue button in the room. I said, now you're not. Get out. And then they called security
Wow.
again. Like, they called security on me because I was being loud. And then even, like, and that's when the other ER nurses were just like, you know, a couple of other people that knew me very well, like, started realizing what was happening. And they came in, they go, Bina. And then they all were just like, no, she has every right to be mad. You know? And so luckily a dear friend of mine from high school worked with me, and she somehow, some way, someone found out. They go, maybe we should go get her friend. So her and my husband went with the baby, went with Rohan, and they literally questioned me. Like, they didn't let me see him. I cannot imagine any other woman that may or may not have been able to speak up for themselves. And they were just kind of like, oh, well, the doctor came, was like, the doctor said he's fine, you know, and went home.
Yeah.
I just can't, like, that is where my entire journey began, is in that moment. And then for it to happen again, he was born on April 19th, for it to happen again on July 4th. Same charge nurse was like, Bina. And she's like, bring him in, come through the ambulance bay, we'll take. So when she came, she knew because she was there the first time. So she's like, when Bina says something is wrong, something is wrong, you know? And it was very, very challenging, very extremely challenging those days. The other major part of me getting severe postpartum, not the one where you don't want to touch your child. Mine was the complete opposite at this point. Mine was like, you don't touch my child, like glued to me in a harness, you know, the ergo, like, you want to hold my child. It was like, where are you going? Like, where are you going with my
Right.
kid? If I don't hear him, if I don't see him, I panicked.
That sounds like a trauma response.
It's horrible.
I mean, you have your first baby, you're leaving the hospital and thinking, I'm bringing home my baby, but something's not right. You end up, you have, all these health tests going on, and then you're back in the hospital. So I know when we've talked, you share just like the difficulties continue, as you come in, and there's a lot of procedures that have to take place and things like that. And
Yeah.
how do you continue to stay strong and advocate for your child in an environment that has really wanted you to keep your voice quiet and do what you're told?
It was really hard. It was really hard, but I want to give credit where credit is due. I had a phenomenal, phenomenal management team. If it wasn't for that manager, that team, we call them the dream team. That's where I learned a lot of my management skills, communication skills, empathetic skills, and when I was navigating back and called in sick a lot when I got back, and it was really rough. Like, a lot of nurses were not nice. There's like, oh, here she is calling off again. Used up all my sick time, was taking days without pay. Then I was possible losing insurance. There was a whole lot of different things that came along with that. And I remember being taken multiple times to HR, and HR was like, well, we don't have help for you. Either you decrease your hours or you quit. Those were my only two options. And I was at a breaking point, because back then, and this was 10 years ago, I was the breadwinner. I held the insurance. My husband now is able to support all five of us, but back then he didn't. And it was scary. And I don't know. I remember one time Rohan again got admitted because he had severe laryngomalacia, so a lot of procedures in and out of ICU. And I remember I would sleep upstairs, and I don't even remember who took care of him during the day. I think my mom or my husband's, because my husband had to go to work. So I think he was there in the morning, and then he went to work until the evening. And then my mom, like, I think between me and my husband and my mom, I honestly don't remember because it was so fragmented. And I remember one day my charge nurse was like, is your son in the hospital? Because she saw the census. And I was like, yeah, but he's in PDICU. I'm like, I know. She goes, where have you been sleeping? I'm like, upstairs, like breaks and everything. I'm going up, And so they were like, no, get off shift. You're leaving, go upstairs. And I was like, no, I'm going to get in trouble again. Oh, she says, you've worked here 4 hours. It's a shift. You're able to go upstairs. So I did. And then that evening, or that later that afternoon, I get a call stating all my managers wanted to talk to me. And I'm like, here we are. I'm going to get fired. Like, I knew it. Really upset, really bitter. I was like, I told myself I shouldn't have done that, And so I go downstairs, and it was the ER director, the HR director, all the department leads in the ER. And they actually granted me 6 months of, kicks me cry still. 6 months of paid leave, and they gave me 6 months of medical.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that turned around a little bit for you. We are going to stick with Bina and her story and how this experience with her own children allowed her to speak up for other patients and their mom in this next episode. So I hope that you will come back with us. Thank you for being here. And if you are in a place where you're struggling and needing to advocate for your own children or not knowing where to turn, Bina is a great resource, and you can leave a comment on this podcast episode, and I'm more than happy to put you in touch with her. But come back and join us on the next episode, where we learn a little bit more about Bina, her story, and how she's making a difference in the world.